In 1994, a German archaeologist stood on a quiet hill in Turkey and did the math twice, because the first result didn't make sense. The stone beneath his feet was older than farming. Older than pottery. 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. For 3 decades, the world was told a simple story. One hill. One genius who found it. One impossible temple that changed history. That story was true. It was also incomplete. 3 decades later, in a chamber that has never seen daylight, another archaeologist's brush uncovers a face. Not an animal. Not a symbol. A human face, staring up from the dark for the first time in roughly 11,000 years. This is not the hill where the story began. It is a place called Karahan Tepe, 30 kilometers away. If one buried temple could rewrite the origin of civilization, what does it mean that the ground around it is still full of them? In 1963, a joint survey team from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University walked across a modest hill in southeastern Anatolia. They noted the broken limestone slabs scattered across its surface and recorded them as an old Byzantine cemetery. Then they moved on. They were wrong, and no one would know it for another 31 years. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute visited the site. He had spent years excavating a related location nearby called Navali Kori, and the moment he saw the limestone fragments, he recognized something the earlier survey had missed entirely. These were not gravestones. They were the buried tops of massive prehistoric pillars. Schmidt began excavating in 1995. What came out of the ground would not just rewrite the story of one hill, it would eventually challenge one of the oldest assumptions in archaeology. By the late 1990s, radiocarbon testing on organic material from the deepest layers returned a date of approximately 9,600 BCE. That is roughly 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Long before the pyramids. Long before writing, before pottery, before the wheel. And according to nearly every model of human development taught at the time, long before humans were supposed to be capable of organizing large-scale monumental construction at all. The accepted theory of civilization ran in one direction. Farming came first. Surplus food allowed people to settle. Settled people, eventually, built temples. Göbekli Tepe suggested the arrow might run the other way. The scale of what these people accomplished is difficult to overstate. The central pillars of enclosure D rise to roughly 5.5 meters and weigh an estimated 10 to 20 metric tons. Some unfinished pillars, still lying in the nearby quarry, stretch past 7 meters and are estimated at 50 tons. There were no metal tools. No wheels. No draft animals bred for labor. Only flint, timber, rope, and coordinated human effort. Some researchers estimate that moving and raising a single pillar of this scale required somewhere between 150 and 500 people working in careful coordination. This was not the work of a wandering handful of hunters. This was organization on a scale no one thought existed before farming, before villages, before what we normally call civilization. For years, the accepted story was almost as dramatic as the discovery itself. When an enclosure's ritual life ended, its builders deliberately buried it, filling the chamber with rubble as a kind of decommissioning, before beginning again elsewhere. More recent geoarchaeological analysis complicates that picture. Detailed sediment studies now suggest that much of the fill inside the enclosures was not placed by human hands at all. Slope wash, rainfall erosion, and structural collapse over centuries account for a large share of it. Some deliberate infilling likely occurred. But the image of a single, dramatic burial ceremony appears to be only part of a much slower, messier process. Even the most famous mystery about this place turns out to be more complicated than the first version of the story allowed. That pattern would repeat again and again. The people who built Göbekli Tepe are consistently described in popular retellings as pure hunter-gatherers, implying small nomadic bands passing through. The evidence on the ground tells a more settled story. Archaeologists have documented large stone vessels at the site capable of holding up to 160 liters, alongside chemical residues consistent with large-scale grain and drink processing. Massive quantities of wild animal bone point to repeated, organized feasting on a scale that implies planning, storage, and return visits, not brief, accidental gatherings. By the 2020s, geophysical surveys using ground radar and magnetic mapping revealed something the early excavations had not shown. Traces of rectangular domestic structures on the slopes around the monumental core. This was not only a shrine visited occasionally by wandering hunters. Increasingly, it looks like a place where people also lived. Klaus Schmidt died suddenly in 2014, 20 years after he first recognized what lay beneath that quiet hill. He never saw what came next. In 2018, Göbekli Tepe was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And starting in 2021, Turkish researchers launched a project that would place his discovery in an entirely new context. It was called Taş Tepeler, the Stone Hills. The project revealed that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated anomaly. It was one node in a network of at least 10 contemporary sites, spread across the same region, sharing the same T-shaped pillars, the same symbolic language, and, researchers now argue, likely the same exchange routes for goods, ideas, and pilgrims. Which brings us back to that chamber at Karahan Tepe, and the face uncovered in 2025. Unlike the abstract, symbolic style long associated with Göbekli Tepe, some of the newer finds across the Stone Hills sites show fully three-dimensional human faces and figures, a stylistic step that researchers are still working to place within the wider timeline. In the same excavation season, archaeologists working at Göbekli Tepe itself uncovered a human statue mounted horizontally on a wall between two enclosures, described by Turkey's Ministry of Culture and Tourism as a likely votive offering. Every one of these discoveries pushes the story further from a single miraculous temple and closer to something larger. A shared culture, spread across a landscape, expressing a common set of beliefs through stone, long before anyone wrote a word of it down. Not every claim about this place has held up to scrutiny. In 2017, researchers proposed that the carvings on Pillar 43, sometimes called the Vulture Stone, encode a precise astronomical date and record a catastrophic comet impact around 10,900 BCE, tied to a controversial idea known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The excavation teams who have spent 3 decades on this site have pushed back firmly. They point out that the pillar's carvings are stylistically consistent with the site's broader symbolic art, that the proposed astronomical reading depends on selectively interpreting some figures while ignoring others on the same stone, and that the dating of the pillar itself does not line up cleanly with the proposed impact date. Some researchers have suggested this explanation, although definitive evidence has never been established, and the primary excavation teams consider it unsupported. The temptation to read a hidden, spectacular message into 11,000-year-old stone is powerful. The evidence to confirm one, so far, is not. Around 8,000 BCE, for reasons still not fully understood, the great enclosures at Göbekli Tepe fell silent, whether through slow environmental change, social transformation, or simple abandonment as populations shifted elsewhere. The monumental building stopped, and the hill was gradually left to the wind and the rain. It waited there, misidentified as a graveyard, for 19 centuries of recorded history to pass it by. Today, the excavation continues under Turkish and German teams, working across 10 related sites, with over 200 researchers and students in the field each season. Every year adds a new pillar, a new face, a new question. The story that began in 1994 as one man's discovery of one impossible temple has become something larger. Not the story of a single miracle in the desert, but of an entire buried world, built by people history had assumed were too simple to build anything at all. We still do not know exactly what these people believed, or what they called the hill they built upon. What we do know is this. Before the first field was planted, before the first city rose, before anyone thought to write anything down, people without metal, without wheels, without permanent nations, gathered in numbers large enough, and organized enough, to raise stone against the sky. And they were not alone in doing it. The ground beneath the Stone Hills is still telling us just how far that world reached. For 30 years, this hill was treated as a lone miracle. It wasn't. It was the first piece of a civilization we're only now learning existed. If stories like this, ones built on real research and not speculation, are worth your time, subscribe.